and writes tirelessly for reliable, spin-free American media. You may have read one of the dozen books he's written in critique of media bias, war in Iraq, and corporate culture. He's also a long-time political activist, first coming under FBI scrutiny at the age of just 14, after picketing for desegregation in Maryland in the 1960s. As a high school senior, he drew further FBI surveillance for his efforts on behalf of the Student Alliance activist group, recently authoring an op-ed asserting that Bradley Manning deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. He's an outspoken champion of whistleblowers and a huge inspiration for activists everywhere. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Norman Sullivan.
Well, back in civics class, we heard that in a democracy, there has to be consent of the governed, right? Now, how can consent of the governed really function if we, the governed, don't know what our government is really doing, right? So, for consent of the governed to mean anything, it has to be informed consent of the governed, right? But the entire process of the surveillance state and the war on whistleblowers is to say, you don't have a right to know what your government is doing. We know that that is BS, right? Now, today in the Guardian newspaper, Glenn Greenwald has reported that almost every member of Congress doesn't have a clue what the NSA is doing in terms of surveillance. How can that be in a democracy? It cannot be in a democracy, am I right? And so you take it another step further. You and me and the residents of this country, if we can't participate in informed consent of the governed, then we can't have a democracy. But it's even worse than that. Almost everybody we elect and send to Congress, they don't have a clue either. Or they claim they don't have a clue. And then we have people on the so-called Intelligence Committee, and you know, it's sort of like what George Carlin said about jumbo shrimp, military intelligence. We put scare quote marks around intelligence, but they call it the House and Senate Intelligence Committees, right? Only certain members of the House and Senate are allowed on those committees. So that they're willing not to be honest with the American people, and that is unacceptable. I'd like to quote something that the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass said back in the 19th century. Power does not concede without a demand. It never did, and it never will. That was true in the 19th century, and it's true today. That puts on us a tremendous burden, but it's a necessary burden. We have understandably sometimes had a negative connotation in our own minds and hearts with the concept of power, because we experience power as coming from on high, illegitimate, undemocratic, and so when we talk about power, often we get uneasy. But there's another kind of power that isn't illegitimate, that doesn't come from up above, that isn't dictatorial, that isn't based on the warfare state and the military state and the surveillance state. And that is something that's been called the power of the people. That's where democracy comes from. That's where our potential is, and that's why we and people around the country are rallying and protesting today to say we refuse to accept the surveillance state. So many people around this country understand today more than ever that the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment are sacred, and we're not going to put up with our government trashing the Bill of Rights. People around this country understand that, but not Nancy Pelosi. People around this country understand that when you have a surveillance state like the Stasi in East Germany in past decades, that is antithetical to democracy. People around this country more and more understand that, but not Nancy Pelosi. People understand around this country more and more that as long as the president and the heads of these committees and the top echelon of government can double talk and triple talk and quadruple talk and talk around the fact that our rights, such as the Fourth Amendment, are being squashed by agencies like the NSA, then we don't have any semblance of democracy.
The NSA surveillance program is not just about the unconstitutionality, even though I think that is the most important thing. It is about jobs here in California. And part of the conversation that I think should be included with fighting these programs is an economic argument. Thank you.
Hi, so I'm a lawyer, can you tell? I came in costume today because I dress up for court. I thought I would dress up for this and for the Fourth Amendment. There have been a lot of quotes from 1984 today, a work of fiction that we're scared is becoming non-fiction. I want to read, I think, one of the most important non-fiction quotes of our society.
And the Bill of Rights actually limits state power. They can't do this. During the past 50 years specifically, the courts have interpreted the Fourth Amendment as to expand the powers of the state to invade the privacy of us, the citizens, while they have been expanding corporate power against worker safety, claiming that the Obama administration claims the power to capture and store, as we have seen, all electronic communications, and claims the power to search all electronic devices within 100 miles of the border without a warrant. I'll repeat that again. The Obama administration claims that they can inspect your handheld device, anything that you carry that's an electronic device that transfers any kind of electronic communications. Right now, today, here at Justin Herman Plaza, the police can come in here, grab your smartphone or your tablet and say, we're going to go rifling through it right now, today, at this time and place. They claim that power. While privacy of flesh and blood persons has been attacked, the courts have interpreted Fourth Amendment protections to apply to so-called corporate persons. To apply to so-called corporate persons. Due to recent court decisions, OSHA, the Occupational and Safety Health Administration, can no longer conduct surprise inspections of dangerous workplaces for the purpose of protecting the lives and health of workers and the public. We saw the explosion of the fertilizer plant in West Texas. Why did that happen? It hadn't been inspected in more than 20 years because OSHA can't go in there. Why? Because corporations have superpowers because they are super persons, if you listen to the Supreme Court. The path, this is the Fourth Amendment. It's all about the Fourth Amendment, illegal search and seizures. The path towards restoring the right to privacy for real persons and the path toward protecting the lives and health of workers and the public is for the people to assemble for a purpose of writing a new Bill of Rights, a Bill of Rights 2.0. We cannot rely upon the President or Congress, or as we have seen the courts, to protect the civil liberties of Americans. We the people can effectively defend our civil liberties, protect our privacy, and protect worker rights by holding nationwide town hall meetings, both real and virtual, for the purpose of establishing modern constitutional protections of citizen privacy.
We're crisscrossing the aisle so many times we look like an Argyle sock. You know, we've got libertarians, conservatives, tree huggers, like we're all in here. And what we are united by is that we believe in liberty. You know, why are we here? We're here because we've been told by very loud voices that we need to give up our liberty for some security. And who has opposed those voices? Who's opposed those voices have been some lone actors, people who saw some stuff that they didn't like and decided to tell the rest of us about it. And we've tried not doing anything to stand up with them. We've tried that, just sitting at home and angrily commenting on the internet, and that didn't work. It's not going to work unless regular, everyday people who've got, you know, reasonable lives and you know, pretty mainstream opinions say, you know what? I'm not going to let them face this alone. I'm going to stand up with them. We're told that we have to sacrifice our liberty for our safety. They're telling us that we need to give up our Fourth Amendment rights to win the war on terror. But I'm sorry to say, but the war on terror will never be won under their parameters. It can't be won as long as we put the world on notice that Americans aren't the people they claim to be. If we let the world know that we can be so frightened by terrorists that we will give up our individual liberties, our specific claims to exceptionalism, then they know that terrorism works. How are you going to fight terrorism? By proving to the world that it works. So this event, what we're doing here is we're letting our elected representatives know that we're watching. We're asking them to stop fighting the war on terror on the terrorists' behalf. Fight it on our behalf. We will never win the war on terrorism until we start listening to that little voice that is speaking inside of us, and it's saying some words that have grown pretty dim now. We have nothing to fear but fear itself. And there are some people, some amongst us, who've been fighting way out in front of us, way in front of the regular people who have to go to work tomorrow. They've been fighting this and they just can't turn that voice off. You know, you gotta feel, they're gonna go to the mat fighting for us. And if we don't stand up with them, they're gonna be ground into hamburger. It's up to us to stand up with them. That's why we're here. We're here to show the world that Americans are actually living up to the ideals they say they're about. And we're here for each other. Thank you so much for coming out. We have amazing speakers for you today. They're going to be able to tell you about, like, we have real history makers, and the idea is that, hey, there's sandwich shops and malls all over the country, and we've got Americans all over the country. What more do you need? Get some sandwiches, call up your friends, say, you know what, that crap we saw in the news, we will not let that stand. We will set a precedent for the 21st century that we can have our liberty, and our liberties can make us safe.
Becoming more electric, he would give his life to prevent that. So would I.
I'm a Japanese journalist from Tokyo, and I would like to ask your opinion about the cost for foreign people. What does it mean as MSA program?
Yes. Again, Manning has actually been criticized for being concerned about the Snowden, for being concerned about the listening in we were doing to foreigners. And it is true also of Manning that Manning released cables that showed how not only America but other Western countries were exploiting the third world, like Haiti, lobbying against a minimum wage or against unionization of workers in Haiti. Now, many people would say, what business is it of ours to worry about our intelligence against other people? Remember, this is not only listening in to their governments or their direct bargaining, it's listening in to hundreds of millions of their innocent civilians. And Manning and Snowden are saying we have no more business doing that than we do to our own people. So what Manning has shown, like his dog tags in the military humanist, he's shown a concern for people other than Americans. And I don't call that treasonous or unpatriotic. I call that being not only a patriotic American, but a patriotic human. I think that's what he is. And it's that concern which led even his own lawyer in front of a military judge to kind of apologize for him and say he's naive. I don't think it's naive. I think that that concern for against any one country, including his own, attempting to be Lord of creation, attempting to be the single empire that runs the world, is quite right. And that humans and America as part of humanity is on a disaster course with a rivalry to control other countries.
Thank you very much. Mr. Daniel, Rahim Rasavi, this crowd, thank you so much. We just had a couple of questions for you. Yes, that's being recorded. We have a mic right there, so pick up everything. A couple of questions. You work for the RAND corporations when you released the Pentagon Papers. Snowden worked for Bose Allen Hamilton. So what is the role of defense contractors in the surveillance state? Can you talk about
striking.
that?
In my day, RAND was one of the very few non-profit private corporations that worked for the national security establishment. Others, like WESIG or IDA, were much closer associated and less independent than we were. Now, of course, Booz Allen is one of hundreds, if not thousands, of corporations that control some of the most sensitive intelligence data. 70% of the intelligence budget goes to private contractors. I don't think that was true for a single dollar 40 years ago, and it wasn't true of the RAND Corporation. What that means is that Snowden himself, I think very creditably said, why should I, as a mid-level analyst in Booz Allen, have access to information that on the one hand invades the privacy of every American, and on the other hand is not available to the Congress? Well, I had a comparable feeling 40 years ago. Why should I have access to a 7,000-page top-secret study that Senator Fulbright of the Foreign Relations Committee can't get, and is refused 4 times, actually, by Secretary Laird on the grounds that he didn't have access to it? I gave it to Senator Fulbright, but he didn't do anything with it because he would be claimed of violating security, and they wouldn't prosecute him, but they would embarrass him, and they might take some appropriations away from him. So other people shied away from that. But of course it's absurd for private contractors to have this kind of capability. It really smells of fascism, of corporatism, of the Mussolini sort, the collaboration of corporations and government, and the almost indistinguishable barrier between the collaboration between them. So I think Snowden is quite right to object to that.
On another topic, you were, in the case of Bradley Manning, the government did not pay for the court reporters, stating due to lack of funds, you actually went out and raised money for...
Well, even in our case, we had to raise...
Bradley Manning. How is it possible?
Yeah, we had to raise money, as I recall, for our own copy of the transcript. But there was a transcript, just copying it costs a lot of money. In this case, the judge ruled that they didn't even have to provide a transcript. They held it as closely as possible as a closed trial, which is, of course, antithetical to the rule of law, not a public trial. They wouldn't give public documents. They wouldn't give a transcript. So a group that I was associated with, the Freedom of the Press Foundation, crowdfunded money to be channeled to a reporter with court capabilities to be present and to provide a transcript, without which we simply would rely on the scribbled notes of a few reporters in the trial.
Well, Mr. Ellsberg, so on one hand, the government does not have the resources to monitor our federal court system. Yet they have the resources to monitor every single communication across all the innocent civilians.
Well, it's a matter of priorities. And of course that applies right across the board to human. This is a government that pretends it doesn't have money to repair crumbling bridges or to provide schools or health capability, but does have money for attack submarines with no other submarines to attack, basically, anymore. And so all these kinds and ABM systems against countries that don't have ICBM. So it's absolutely absurd.
Final question, Mr. Ellsberg. You identify yourself with Snowden, Bradley Manning. What advice do you have for the poor souls working at the NSA or working at one of these defense contractors, seeing injustice and humanity being carried out every day? what incentive do they have after the trial of Bradley Manning and Snowden fleeing to Russia to step in and do what you did? What would you tell that person?
I would tell them, don't do what I did, which was to go to Congress first or go to my superiors in the Defense Department. Don't do that. What people advise them to do is the right way to do it, because that does nothing but identify them as troublemakers and potential leakers, and to get them cut off, retaliated against, and stigmatized by their people, as happened to the NSA people who did exactly that. As they said, they did it wrong, Snowden did it right. So, and then the next point is, don't do like Manning and allow yourself to be snatched up and put incommunicado and put yourself. Snowden, in this respect, did it exactly right. Gather the documents, and if necessary, do everything you can to keep invisibility here, anonymity. Now, actually, WikiLeaks did provide anonymity and was not broken on that, but Bradley Manning himself couldn't resist discussing it with what turned out to be a government informant. So don't trust any government informants or anybody, and do it like Snowden. He's done it, I think, exactly right. Now, Snowden didn't do perfectly. He obviously had the judgment that Hong Kong would be a safe place for it. Wrong. China had more influence over that than he seemed to have expected. So, maybe not go to Russia at all. So he could have gone directly to Venezuela or Ecuador. That would have been better. Although he felt that would identify him to the NSA quicker.
Now, in regards to the Millennium Generation, what advice do you have for them? Why should they care to go in the footsteps of Daniel Ellsberg, Snowden, and Mannings? Why should they care?
Not because there is any guarantee that telling the truth will bring about change. When Snowden says his greatest fear was that nothing was changed, and Manning also, that is the likelihood. That's likely. But no one can say that there is no chance of change, as some do say, and they're wrong. They have no proof of that. The odds are against us, but the possibility is there, and the stakes are enormously high. For humanity as a whole, in the first instance, there's an individual war like Afghanistan or Iraq to be ended. In the second place, there's democracy in the United States to be ended. The third thing that Snowden has brought out is that the entire world is seeking this interference with the privacy of their own citizens. Not just the U.S. They're all doing it. It's just that the U.S. has 1,000 times more capability to do it. But the others will get that. So we have to realize that we live in a new world, and we have, it may be too late to change, but it may not. We can't tell. So the answer is to tell the truth, to take the risks. I can't tell individuals to do that. I can't tell your family doesn't count for anything. Your children's education is of no importance. That's for them to judge. But I can say everybody who knows that the truth is being concealed should consider whether this is not the time for them to speak out, and to do it in ways that will both capture public attention, especially with documents, and protect themselves from retaliation. That's what I would tell them.
Mr. Ellsberg, thank you so much for a lifetime of activism.
No.
I'm sorry. Sorry.
She was the one who said in the middle, I have got to take a ship. And we stopped. Do you remember that? And the helicopters were hovering overhead, watering trees.
This man has just done so many incredible things. Anyway, I just wanted to stop and say
give me an email, okay, and remind me of your email. Ellsbergd1@gmail.com.
You don't have a partner. My memory won't.
I might have one.
God, if I just remember my question.
I'd like to do another. Oh, you know what? I should bring him on.
It's okay.
Sorry. I'll try to remember Ellsbergd1@gmail.
Okay. People have been being targeted.
Yeah. Well, just Ellsbergd1.
You know, it's funny as we point to China and Russia as being examples of totalitarianism, etc. But I just traveled to China for a month after studying the language for 5 years. I had a great time.
Yeah, well,
the trains everywhere, people were fine. It's just wonderful.
The trouble is,
they're going in a different direction.
Who was saying that? You? Right. Yeah, the trouble is, it's possible to have a great time in, maybe less, in the GDR or Russia.
Let's talk about gardening.
Without newspapers. People live, people get married, people have babies, and you know, the Americans would adjust to that. It just would be not a democracy anymore.
I know, I agree. This is very sad.
It's not the end of the world in itself,
freely
but it's worth your life to prevent it.
It seems like the NSA is trying to protect corporate interests of Monsanto as well.
Well, that's the government in general.
Yeah,
and of course, the NSA has direct connections with people who are contractors for them. I don't know about Monsanto.
And Muslims too. They target Muslims and
oh yeah,
GMO.
but not only Muslims.
Yeah.
It's anti-war groups, environmental groups.
I was going to say environmental groups like Monsanto, people who oppose Monsanto. I was.
I'm not a fan
oh,
of
the Tea
Party.
Party.
They're being
on the
watched
list.
too, right?
They're on the list. Hey, all those cops' phones, they're being tapped too. They're tapping your phones too, cops.
Concern with the law that was passed in Illinois is that it prohibits patients from growing their own medicine, and I just want to be clear that the 2014 voter ballot initiative would not prohibit patients in California from growing their own medicine. Is that correct?
No, absolutely not. While it's nice to see different parts of the country, especially some places conservative as Illinois, move forward with you know, cannabis is good, but yeah, the governor there is definitely saying that it would be, you know, one of the more restrictive laws in the country.